What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Noizze Podcast, part of the Noizze Podcast Network and sponsored by Satanic Teaco. I'm your host, your boy, Chris Pugh, and I am joined once again, but not in visual form again, Samuel Lewis. So we're going to close off the show this week by discussing the new Signs of the Swarm record, Amongst the Low and Empty. It's out on July 28th via Century Media Records. It's the Pennsylvanians' fifth album and the follow-up 2021's Absolver. Sam, the second we got this record, it was an album that I knew I'd want to discuss with you, but my immediate thought was, I hope it doesn't suffer the Lorna Shore effect. And by that I mean, I think because of the trajectory of Lorna Shore and what happened for them after the release of that single To the Hellfire, which we loved, and I love Lorna Shore, adore Lorna Shore, can't wait to see them in November, great band. What I think, and then you see the problem with things like that is then it all becomes a chase of right, who can sound the heaviest, who can do the heaviest breakdown. I'd imagine it was a similar thing to like with Thrashing 1986 as Dave Lombardo records his kick drums on Angel of Death. It's like, right, who can do it faster than that? And then there is only so far you can take that until it's like, right, there really is no heavier to go. And especially with this album being produced by Josh Schroeder, who's worked with Lorna Shore, my immediate fear was that this album would be good regardless, because Signs of the Swarm are a very talented band, and Bobby Crow, who's the drummer and lead songwriter, is a fantastically talented musician. I knew at the very least it'd be good, but I didn't want to just be constantly chasing the Lorna Shore sound or to try and sound heavier than Lorna Shore at all costs, especially cost to songwriting. But for me, Sam, I feel like this is a great deathcore record in and of itself, regardless of the Lorna Shore factor. How do you feel about that?
I think both the things you said are true. I think it's a very, very good deathcore album, but I also think it falls victim of the tropes of deathcore at the same time. I think that's okay as well. Um, I think it's worth putting a PSA on this record that you have to be of a certain temperament and a certain taste to really delve in. I think to call this extreme metal in the same way that you would call Bathory extreme metal is like this is like a different genre entirely almost. And I think it's on that kind of extreme metal that only deathcore can really sort of create. I think it's a really good deathcore record, but I do think that it does exchange songwriting depth for the necessity to finish a song a certain way. I feel like it falls into that trap quite often. And I don't mean this as a criticism, because deathcore, like a lot of subgenres within metal, there is a working blueprint that is incredibly effective, and there's a certain level of expectation from the fan base as well. Like every time a new metal album comes out, especially in these genres, the first questions that fans will ask is it heavy? Is it dark? What are the breakdowns like? How tough is it? They don't sacrifice anything on the vocals, do they? Because I like X, Y, and Z. And any kind of extension away from that is kind of treated with derision within certain metal circles. But so this is not going to do that. It's not going to turn any noses up within extreme deathcore circles. It fits very nicely within that genre. Though I just wish that push a little bit more variety in the songwriting. But then again, I'll ask you a question. Am I being fair to a deathcore band for saying it's a criticism that you've created a good deathcore album and that follows all the deathcore tropes, and saying, well, I wish it did other stuff? Or should I just accept it for what it is and talk about how good it is within the genre? Am I being unfair by criticizing it for that?
No, I don't think you are at all. I think that how does any band expand themselves outside of a tin can? They do that by creating themselves new avenues, right? Like Lorna Shore and like Brand of Sacrifice, they have changed how deathcore bands use synths. Like Lorna Shore
Mm.
are expanding a rate that is really absurd to watch, to be fair, considering
Yeah,
what they perform. And that's because of this symphonic element that they've added to the band. Lorna
agreed.
Shore, Lorna Shore weren't doing this 5 years ago. And I
No, they
know
weren't.
Lorna Shore, they got really hit badly by COVID and by allegations to their former lead singer and stuff like that. But regardless of all of that, prior to all of those issues, Lorna Shore, I always thought Lorna Shore were great and had loads of respect for them, thought they're an excellent band, but they certainly weren't doing what they're doing now. They're doing what they're
No,
doing now because of the songwriting push they've given themselves to their craft
I
and try new things. So I don't think that's a harsh thing to say at all.
okay.
I think
Then
it's
that,
relative there.
yeah. Well, thank you then, because that gives me a little bit more of a foundation to go further then, because I think that I agree. The reason that Lorna Shore took a step forward is because they stepped into symphonic and they stepped into melody. And that is the final trope. When a metal band can retain a darkness while also exploring elements of light within their music and their songwriting, they can integrate strong choruses and melodies within the package of their genre. I think that's when bands become incredibly successful. And I think actually one of the reasons why Dream Killer is placed in all caps is because the band know that that's their strongest song, and lo and behold, it's the one with the best melody. What a shock! Because I really like this, but the title track, Terror of Torsos and Borrowed Time all end in exactly the same way. The conclusion of the song is the same, and it is breakdown that slows down and then pauses for growl and then returns to breakdown, and then it breakdowns a little bit further and it just slows down, and it's this whole big destructive slow crawl to the conclusion, and it's very impactful, and it's very reminiscent of that brilliant Lorna Shore EP. And I can't escape the feeling, rightly or wrongly, and I'm happy to accept that this might just be a judgment on my part. The bands like this are interested in chasing a moment of like, look what this band does on this song, like a
Yeah.
90-second Instagram snapshot or Facebook Live or Twitter video, like you know how like sports shows, like like Sky Sports do this. I'll use a British example. Like Sky Sports love getting the 90-second breakout video of Roy Keane being really critical, or Jamie Carragher
Yeah.
and Gary Neville arguing. It doesn't really matter what they're arguing about as long as they're shouting at each other, so it gets clicks and stuff. Because the debate isn't what matters. It's creating that like hot take kind of divisive kind of thing on social media. And I get the impression that sometimes metal bands are chasing that kind of, oh my god, let's write a riff at the end that makes somebody create a YouTube video where they react to this live. And the thing is with Lorna Shore as well is that Lorna Shore's growth has also come with a secondary market of social media attention, where there's this like reaction to Lorna Shore's music that's also becoming like an arm of Lorna Shore's aura, where there'll be a vocal coach that watches Will Ramos sing, or there'll be someone that's never listened to metal that's made to watch a Lorna Shore album, or someone who like runs a gospel in a church and it's like, listen to this, and
Yeah.
they're really shocked and stuff. And it feels like, are you writing songs for breakout videos, or are you writing the best things that serve the songs? Now for deathcore, it's difficult to judge that, I think, because sometimes it's both. Because sometimes the best thing that serves a deathcore song is a breakdown. It's the most violent expression of that
Most of
genre.
the time, that is the case.
Yes,
Most
and
of the time,
it's the
it
most
needs the
violent
breakdown.
expression of a song, and is also usually what fans are waiting for.
Yeah.
Deathcore is the only genre really. Well, metal is one of the only genres really where the most famous bits are often without lyrics. That tends
Yeah.
not to be the case in any other genre, where we're so focused on the instrumentation there. So with that, it's hard for me to say you're only doing this for the Instagram likes and all the rest of it, because they're probably not, because they're also writing deathcore, and it's also simultaneously what serves the song better. But I do think there are some occasions where they revert to tropes in an attempt to further their reputation of extremity more than they serve the song, because the songs that do the best on this are the ones but then again, this is just my opinion, are the ones that inject a little bit of lightness and melody in amongst the death metal, which is why Dreamkiller's fantastic. And lo and behold, the tune that Matt Heafy contributes to, with The Witch Beckons, is really great because it's got like a black metal feel to it as well that gives it a little bit of difference as well. as the second half of Echelon, or Echelon, however you want to say that or pronounce it. Because after the opening of that tune, which is, let's be honest, the opening of Echelon is like borderline unintelligible. Like, it's hard to figure out what they're actually doing. But the second half of that, when they change the groove and it becomes easier to follow, lo and behold, that's really successful, because you shouldn't need a degree in Pro Tools to be able to figure out what a band's doing. And I think the most successful moments on this are where they actually abandon the necessity to chase their genre and instead focus on what serves the song best. But at the same time, what serves the genre best is also really impressive, because there are some moments on here that are shocking. And it is like one of those albums that, like, back in the day, you would have sat me down and said, man, you got to listen to this just for like the shock value. But then
Yeah.
how often are you listening to that record again for fun? How often do you like, oh, I'm gonna go for a run today and listen to this album? Like, is it that kind of record? For some people it might be. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I think it's successful. I think it's very good. I think it fits in the genre. I just wonder about the viability of it. I wonder about the necessity of it. And I actually do think the best ones on this album are where they separate away from that a touch.
Just to add to what you mentioned there, and after this, we will actually start talking specifically about the album. I understand exactly where you're coming from, because if I just use like a professional wrestling reference, because obviously that's like my like go-to sport along with
Second
football.
language, yeah.
But the first time I saw like a reverse pile driver from the second row, I was like, "Oh my god, that's amazing! I can't believe that they've just done that. What an amazing spot! I hope they're okay. They took a huge risk, but that was incredible." But then the next time I see it, I'm like, "Oh right, okay. What's next now?"
Yeah.
Like now you need to do it like from the top rope now, where you can't do it from the top rope because you're literally risking breaking someone's neck. Well, in that case, then I'm not going to be like as surprised, or as like I'm like when
Mhm.
I'm going to see AEW at Wembley Stadium in August, and a lot of AEW's wrestlers are like famed for doing like ridiculous, crazy stunts, which really now don't really mean much to me, because these stunts are just derivatives of one I've seen before, and unless they set someone on fire inside the ring, I'm not going to see anything that's going to make me think, oh my god, that's incredible. What I love about pro wrestling is like the story of the match. And the story of the characters going in that
Yeah,
make it matter to me, not the ridiculous, like absurd neck breakers off the top rope. Because now, once you do it, I might jump out my seat for a second, but then the next time I'll be like, oh yeah, that's the neck breaker thing that I've seen them do. And that's kind of what I mentioned about the Lorna Shore effect, where Lorna Shore released to the Hellfire, it becomes like a sensation on social media. It becomes a sensation on YouTube, like you mentioned. Videos of people who don't listen to metal, or people who have no interest in metal, old people, etc. Reactions to Lorna Shore videos, to the Hellfire's breakdown, etc. And because of that popularity, how could you resist being a deathcore band and chasing that for yourself? Because why wouldn't you want to? Because, oh my god, look how popular this is. We'll do that thing. But then obviously, nothing. Apart from one, there's two things on this album that made me kind of really think, whoa, this is absurd, in the same way that I felt when we reviewed that Lorna Shore EP. Other than that, this is just like a great deathcore album but that I don't think is going to be like doing the rounds on social media, with the exception of like one moment that's on their faces without names, which we'll speak about in a moment. Yes, I just wanted to make that kind of anecdote to agree with you and give like my perspective on the chasing the Lorna Shore effect.
I would absolutely agree with that, and I think it's reminiscent of horror movies.
Yeah,
Like, you look at the boom of horror movies in the late 70s and early 80s that were like Halloween and that type of stuff. By like the mid 80s to the late 80s, horror movies were like ridiculous. They were like Evil Dead and stuff, where people's faces were being blown up and like all these like really gruesome stuff. And look at the way that the first Saw was like, oh my god, it's horrifying. By Saw 4, people are like, oh yeah, he gets his genitals stuck in a jigsaw. Oh, that's cool. What else does he do? And
yeah.
we immediately became normalized. And that, you're right, because if you center your music and you center your product around a particular gimmick, eventually people are going to get bored of that gimmick and wonder what else you do. And that's where the value of the songwriting is. And just the way that you talk about the narrative of wrestling getting you in as a fan, the most compelling and award-winning and generally accepted great movies are obviously the ones with the greatest characterization and plot change. And you look at the scariest movies now are not ones where people are getting like slashed through the head. They are more psychological thrillers. Like Get
Yeah,
Out, for example, was really
amazing,
impactful.
amazing film.
But not like a stereotypically scary horror movie in the sense of it's like a slasher or anything like that. It was psychologically terrifying. Look at Black Mirror, the amount of success that Black Mirror has had by not actually having anything particularly gory in any of their episodes. So to move back to this, I think if you're chasing, it's a fickle thing to chase, isn't it? Social media attention and stuff, and eventually that will move on to something else. And if you put your faith in the depth of the music, then that's you're gonna be better served to that. But I don't want to take away from what is, for its time, for its genre, for its audience, a really, really good deathcore record, a really, really good deathcore record. I know a lot of people that would really enjoy this, a lot of people that would listen to this regularly. And I know a few bands, like you can imagine, like sort of tours going on. And when it says, oh, they were touring, they did a few tours with Humanity's Last Breath, I'm like, that makes sense. Like that's it, that
Yeah.
works with me. And they're going out with Decapitated, I think I read from the PR notes. I like that. That's cool. That's good for them. And metal bands look after each other, and that's really, really good. I think the best thing that I can say about this album before we get to the track by track analysis is that this is going to fit really nicely in with where the genre is going. This is another example of the steps that the genre is making. I just think, I'm sure like you do, the more songs they write that are like Dream Killer, the more longevity they're likely to have.
Yeah, I want to be clear that what I was mentioning, it wasn't a criticism of this album. I think this is a great deathcore album. This is going to go straight into my great to 2023 playlist on Spotify when it comes out. I'm a fan of this. I think it's really good. Again, I think deathcore as a whole might have an issue if it gets stuck under the Lorna Shore effect, but that's for a future time. And I want to talk about this album. We don't usually do the singles, Sam, but I just want to talk about the footwork on the title track because it's absurd. That the final minute of Amongst Low and Empty is insane. And for you as like the drummer, I'm just mate, the footwork on that final minute is something.
It's incredible. Oh, it's fantastic to the point that I'd actually want to see it live to verify that a real person did it. Because
Yeah.
like you know as well as I do, there's lots of whispers, aren't there, about like sort of like drum tracks and clicks and using the machines to sort of like speed things up and stuff. And it is so fast that it's so fast. It makes me borderline superstitious. It's like the moon landing of drum of double kicks where I'm like, is that a real flag? Like, what's going on there? So there was a part of me that was like, that should be a compliment in itself. I think it is the point that I genuinely hope that this is actually recorded by a human individual. Because for a couple of seconds I was wondering how possibly a human individual could do this physically. Because to call
Bobby
it
Crow, their drummer, is really legit, man. I believe it's Bobby Crow. He takes his music very, very, very seriously. I can't, obviously I don't know, but I'd be surprised if it wasn't actually him. And Josh Schroeder, who has helped us work with Lorna Shore and stuff. Again, he's worked with Austin Archer, the drummer of Lorna Shore, and Austin Archer is as legit as it gets. So I'd be very surprised if it's not Bobby Crow actually doing it. I'd be quite surprised.
I'm gonna I want it to be real, so I'm just gonna go along that it is. So that's fair. Then in that case, it's extraordinary, and it reaffirms the evolution of the musicianship in metal now. To the point where like the floor is so high now. To be in a deathcore band, you have to have like it's beyond degree level musicianship here. This is beyond like your grading systems. This type of stuff. The level of talent and stamina it takes to be able to produce that, to be able to play that to a click track and then be able to replicate that live is astonishing. It really is astonishing. And it speaks to the level of athleticism that's going on, let alone the technique and stuff, because the level of strength and dexterity that you need in your lower limbs to be able to do this for an extended period of time. And then also, it's not like he's just doing that on its own. He's playing beats over the top of it and stuff. Like it's not like the only thing that's
Insane.
happening. It is extraordinary. what as well I want to say as well is the songwriting, the way that some of these songs on this album shift, like talk about the Terror of Torso, by the way, to the like the blast beats with the industrial electronic stuff, but the way that some of these songs are written, especially on Terror of Torso, the way it flits from tempo to tempo on a dime immediately. Like listening to this record, I couldn't do anything else. Like
Yeah, no, no.
I had to concentrate by like really to really follow it because you tend because it happened to me a couple of times while listening to it. You lose your attention, like you get a text message or something flashes up, and we're in a completely different part of the song by the time I'm listening to it again, and I'm like, what? How did
Yeah,
that transition away from this? And the thing is you rewind it, and sometimes they don't transition at all, and they just stop and do something else. It's like a schizophrenic style of writing, like a Tasmanian devil esque approach to riff writing that I haven't heard to this sort of level for a very long time. Um, because even when we talked earlier in the year about the Periphery record, which is really complicated and really like labyrinthine and all this type of stuff, but you can kind of track it, you know, like their transition from one to another. This is songwriting, like it's erratic. You know what I mean? Like
mm,
it's I don't know how else to really describe it. It's like the soundtrack to a sociopath or somebody that's got like mental illnesses or something like that, because the way it flits from thing to thing, like it's crazy. It really is crazy. It's a challenging listen, actually, like from a following along standpoint. It's almost like you're waiting for something that you can cling to sometimes because it is just so quick and so fast paced and so varied. How did you sit with that?
well, I thought this was an album that is a test of endurance, but mostly from the sense of it constantly pushes you to the edge of your extremity level. But I think the album is great, man. I think it's a great deathcore album. This Pray for Death's got that explosive chug to open. Pray for Death, like that could have opened the album. It'd be the perfect gig opener. The way that explosive chug bursts through the mix.
Yeah.
There's isolated vocals. The verse comes to life, which I think is a brilliant little touch from Josh Schroeder, the producer. It's got gent-like speeds to the rhythm guitar, and Bobby Crow's footwork again is just chaos personified. There's a break in the middle eight before the breakdown comes in with this interspersed inaudible silence, which is just fantastic, and obviously just taking nods from Code Orange there, which I obviously adore. Borrowed Time's got at the very start of Borrowed the Time, it's got this kind of after the burial like riff that runs through the spine of it, which I really liked. You got these tiny little stabbing riffs from Carl Schultz behind Bobby's double kicks. Again, sounding straight out of the Code Orange bag. Give me all of that. There's the heinous breakdown with the elongated screams from David Simonik, who's the vocalist. That's a huge plus as well. To be honest, mate, the only time where I felt like this album took a bit of a drop off in terms of quality was Shackles Like Talons, which I thought was kind of a much of a muchness, just blended into the rest of the album, kind of like a nothing to report deathcore track. But the rest of this album is constantly high tempo, high quality, highly technical, brutal, and it's a fantastic listen for a deathcore fan.
I completely agree. I completely agree. Like the from like you're right within the context and the confines of its genre, you get everything you want. If you're a big deathcore fan and you listen to this, it just ticks all of the boxes on this. Like you talked about Pray for Death, I agree. The groove at the 2 minute mark is just how would you even replicate that? How would you even
Right.
do that? At the times, it is absolutely ridiculous. The opening of Between Fire and Stone jumped out to me to the way it jumped into this like shifting tempo and the choppy rhythm. And to the point where halfway through that song, it actually goes to like a 4/4 rhythm for what feels like the first time all album. And I'm like, oh, okay, I can nod along to this bit. Um, I think that the elements of like that there's a note in the PR where it says that the songwriting appears to be more rigid and yet more exploratory. I agree that it's exploratory. I don't think it's rigid at all. I think the idea that you call the songwriting here rigid, I think is crazy. When you listen to this is the end of Between the Fire and Stone. It settles to that slow down and breakdown. That's where I started to talk about the bits we talked earlier, where this appears to be like a trope. And I agree with Shackles Like Talents, felt a bit superficial. But it almost emphasizes Dream Killer, because when Dream Killer comes out, it's almost like so clearly the most polished song in terms of the writing.
Yeah, yeah,
And they're like, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but like he writes that little lead riff at the end, and it's almost like I can hear how buzzing the band are. Like, because they sort of go back to it and they revert
yeah.
back to it, and they sort of bring this as like this like repeated motif of that lead riff. And then the nicest man in metal, Matt Heafy, comes
Oh,
on
mate,
comes on
amazing.
comes on the Witch Beckons, because is there ever been a new metal band that Matt Heafy hasn't personally endorsed or done something with? Like it
He's
feels like
amazing.
he's just everywhere, isn't he? It's amazing.
He's amazing.
But it's a great riff from what I think is the pre-chorus, but like it's hard to track this in like traditional senses. Like if you imagine like tracking this out on like a whiteboard and you put like grids and stuff, it'd be like riff 17 pre-chorus B or something. Like it's impossible to track it in a normal section. But what felt like the pre-chorus to me with the riff on that was really, really great. And I think it showed as well that they're capable of writing songs with a different inflection, because when Heafy comes in and it's got that eerie atmospheric section, that showed a little bit of depth to the band that I was happy to see. I've talked about Echelon before, but the last two tracks, Faces Without Names, I think Faces Without Names is ridiculous. Like this stabbed
Mate,
opening with a fast-paced lead. It's a listenable riff as well, which is like really good. Like it's catchy. The stabbing rhythm in between. It's just a phenomenal song. Sorry, I interrupted you there.
no, sorry. Like, I was just gonna like add to what you're saying. Earlier, I mentioned there's two moments on this album that I think could break that kind of social media chain where people are like, "Oh, you have to see this." One of them is the kick drum on "Amongst Low and Empty," which is obviously already out as a single. The other one is the middle eight of this song. Like, I don't even know what's happening in the middle eight of this song. It's hard to effectively summarize the heaviness and the technicality of what takes place in that middle eight of Faces Without Names. It's absurd.
I completely agree with you, mate. I completely agree. And then they go for like a slow, methodical black metal song to finish, I think, with Malady. Like traditional death metal opening, but so thumping and nasty. And then that final conclusion appears to be their last attempt at these classic deathcore sort of breakdowns and stuff as they return back to type a little bit. But from like a if you want a heavy, nasty, chaotic album to stick on and you're really into your extreme metal, you really can't go wrong here. You really can't go wrong at all here, because this is really excellent within the confines of its genre. And you can kind of hear how the music is tiptoeing forward in terms of the stamina, in terms of the musicianship and the dexterity of the musicians involved. And that's as fair as I can say to it. If deathcore was the only genre to exist in metal, this would be like the second best album of the year by the end of the year. It's easily one of the best deathcore releases so far. It's going to be a
Yeah.
top 5 extreme metal release by the end of the year. And if that's your bag, you're going to love this album.
Yeah.
The only criticism, which is not really a fair criticism, is like if you're not really into deathcore, you're going to wonder what else there is. But if you're not really into deathcore, you're probably not stumbling across this anyway. You
Yeah.
know,
That's
it's
true.
it's like what's saying about the final of Wimbledon. Well, I'm not really into tennis. Well, that's fine. You can just watch something else. Like that's for tennis fans, it's really good, and that's just how it
Yeah.
is. And this is exactly the same as that. So I have to temper any criticism because it's my job here to sort of give an honest opinion. My only criticism, weirdly, is that outside of its genre, I wished it did more. But even that's not really a criticism, because within what it's supposed to do, it does it as well as almost any other band, barring Lorna Shore, that we've really got in the genre and the industry and the game right now. So as far as that goes, like it's a terrific album.
We're going to leave it there for this episode of the Noizze Podcast. Thank you very much for listening. We really, really appreciate you coming back with us. And me and Sam are going to try and hit at the very, very least every fortnight now. We used to just do every album that we wanted to talk about. We do an episode for, but that then left us with like extensive dry spells of recording shows, and we don't really want to do that. So we're going to go back to like the fortnightly release and try and stick to that. Although we are going to have another episode coming out in the next 10 days because next week well, in 2 weeks, we've got the releases of the new Earn album and the new Teenage Wrist album. So me and Sam are going to be here to record an episode discussing those albums as well. So yeah, stick around. Please subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us /like/subscribe, depending on whichever service you use. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcast, we will be there. Follow us on Twitter at Noizze Podcast if you want to keep up with our daily ridiculous incessant posting. And thank you so much for listening. The new Signs of Swarm album is a superb deathcore record that I really like. It's 100% going to go into my best of 2023 Spotify playlist as soon as it's out. Great record. And we will be back in around about 10 days discussing Teenage Wrist and discussing Earn. Thank you so much for listening. We love you and we'll see you soon. Bye.